Alrighty, what's going on, you guys? I'm here with a PC building video. This is the first PC that I've ever built. Something I was super excited about doing. I've always been, more and more interested into the PC hobby since I got like a pre-built, taking parts off, putting it together. I kind of just got into like obsessed with the performance aspect. So we're using a B550 motherboard and the Asus Prime B550 MA Wi-Fi 2. This is a micro ATX board, so it's pretty small, but it's not like as little as like the mini ATX. So it's pretty decent sized board for like an ATX case. The processor that I'm using is the Ryzen 5 5600. It's a 6-core 12-thread processor, and based on all the research that I could find, it was a great option for this price point. It can still handle games in 1080p, ultra, very, very effectively. So that was obviously a no-brainer. I got it for about 80 bucks on AliExpress because all the other versions came with a that little shitty cooler that AMD processors come with that I definitely didn't plan on using because, I wanted to get the most out of this processor. And yeah, this is me plugging in the SSD. I brought my own little heatsink for it because people don't normally have a heatsink for their SSD, but I definitely wanted to have one because I wanted to get the most out of it. It's a Gen 4 SSD because the motherboard is Gen 4 compatible, something that I was also looking for with the motherboard. And yeah, it's Gen 4. It's much faster than a Gen 3 processor, so you can do things, transfer data a lot better, remux recordings much faster, play games at a much, faster pace. The operating system is just on a faster SSD, which is something that I really wanted. And I use my own thermal pads. You saw that a second ago. I was using the thermal grizzly stuff. I really wanted to make sure this thing was operating at the maximum capacity. So I added the RAM sticks. That's just 16 gigabytes of DDR4 at a 3200 megahertz. I can't remember what the actual what the exact brand was, but it's like pretty typical RAM. Nothing too special. It was like 30 bucks. The cooler that I'm using is the Thermal Right Peerless Assassin. It's obviously super duper overkill for this build and for this CPU, but that's something that I want. The CPU cooler was only like 35 bucks anyway, so it was definitely, a no-brainer for me. The only issue was that it was kind of warped a little bit. So it kind of looks like it's sagging when you look at the PC, but it's not. It's just CPU cooler is just like bent slightly. And yeah, getting this thing on was a bitch, bro. I had no idea that you had to press into the CPU so damn hard. I thought I was gonna flatten the CPU like a pancake. I had no idea it was on that tight. But yeah, this is me adding the fans on. Overall, is a pretty straightforward process. It probably took me about like maybe 2 hours to do, and this is the very, very first time I ever built a PC. If I were to do this again, it'd probably take me like 45 minutes. So that's the motherboard, the SSD, the RAM, the CPU, and the CPU cooler. But yeah, this is me plugging the fans into like this little fan socket thing here at the top of the motherboard, a little 4-pin fan connector. And that obviously worked out really, really well. I just plugged them on up, nothing too crazy. And this is me on the back of the case. I was removing the old PSU. Okay, it's going really fast right now, but that's whatever. I was removing the power supply because I wasn't confident in how old it was. Even though it was very, very clean and it looked new, I just did not feel confident because this is a build that I was trying to resell. So I'm using this 750 watt Thermal Right PSU, which I wanted to get brand new. I got a really, really nice one. This one was about like 80 bucks. And it's great for like future proofing. I wanted to make sure this build only is going to use like, it could have used like a 500 watt power supply. I could have gotten one for like 40 bucks, but I really wanted to make sure this thing was future proof because this motherboard's nice and the SSD is nice. The case is really, really nice. The GPU is pretty good. And if you wanted to upgrade the build, you could easily do so by, upgrading the GPU or removing the CPU and replacing it with like a 5800 X3D. You could absolutely make this a monster PC if you wanted to. You could get like a 4070 Super on here. You could easily turn this into a high-end build. The first PC I got was very limited in all aspects, and I couldn't really upgrade it at all. I had to get a new one. So that's kind of one thing that I didn't like about it. So yeah, a little extra money to make this thing future-proof is not a bad idea. So yeah, that's me putting in the power supply. That right there on the right side of the power supply is the little like fan LED complex thing. That wasn't hard to figure out either. It's basically you just plug in all the fans into that thing, and then you plug that into the motherboard, as well as making sure it's connected to the case button. So nothing really too complicated there. It looks like a ton of wires, but it's like it's really simple. It's nothing too complex. I was actually kind of like blown away by how easy this whole process was, except for adding the fan on. That was a bitch. There's one thing I really learned a lot about is the PSU. You got to make sure that shit has enough PCIe ports. You should probably have like 5 or 6 if you want to future proof it. If you're getting a nice PSU, make sure it's got at least 5. And honestly, probably have 6, right? Because you're going to need 2 for the motherboard, because most of the more modern motherboards need 2, because the CPU is going to be a monster, eats a ton of power. And then the GPU might have 4, because we already know that some of the high-end NVIDIA cards have 4 PCIe inputs, and they need all 4 of them to run as effectively as possible and as safely as possible without damaging the components and whatnot. So yeah, this is me screwing on the motherboard. I'm just putting in a few little pins in there at a time, because just in case I fuck it up and then I have to pull the motherboard out, which I did end up happening. This case, by the way, is it's like Skytech. It's called like, I don't even, Skytech Gaming, something like that. It's a pretty nice PC case, but the branding is just like something I've never heard of, but it is very nice. The LEDs are fully customizable by a click of one button. You can make it look dope. And the fans are crazy good. I was working on this PC, like the cable management, while the PC was running, and my hands were getting cold, bro. That shit, these fans are sick. And I think the mid tower like ATX design is great for like airflow, because my big ass, full tower case is like, the airflow is not even that good. Like I'm glad that like I have an AIO cooling my CPU, because I don't think like a fan would really do it that great. But yeah, I had to unplug all this stuff because the PCIe, the 8-pin that connects to the CPU, I couldn't get the cable management just right, so I went ahead and removed the motherboard, plugged that in first, and then set the motherboard back in place, because I wanted it to look real good. I don't want a bunch of cables dangling everywhere. A lot of people say the first thing you got to do is plug in the motherboard and then put the cables in, but I think that a few cables before putting the motherboard in is a good idea, because you can really get the cables to look great. So yeah, this is me working back on the fan cables. I wanted to make sure these look good as well, so I took them in the back. Pretty straightforward, just a little bit of cable management here and there, being creative with it. Nothing too stressful or difficult. People told me that cable management is a bitch, but I just found it to be kind of fun, figuring out like the best way to make this thing as aesthetically pleasing as possible. The USB ports on top of the PC case work phenomenally. I was plugging in my mouse and my keyboard adapters there, and it was sick. And yeah, there was a bunch of little like LED things. You had the positive, the negative, then you had like the on and off switch to plug in at the bottom of the motherboard, which was pretty simple and easy to do. Just a quick tutorial. That's the thing that's so nice about PC building, is you can find a tutorial for anything. Yeah, like if you wanted to build your own PC and you were just worried about it being too difficult, I would definitely just go ahead and do it. It's fucking easy as hell. It really isn't difficult at all. The building part is fun, but like downloading the drivers and everything can get a little bit head scratching, because like you want to make sure you do that shit right. And like you don't know whether the motherboard has the drivers yet, or the BIOS has the right version, or, it's hard to tell, because something could be working okay, but it might not be working as well as it could be. So you might have to delete certain drivers and then re-download them to make sure they downloaded correctly. It's a bit of a pain on that end. Yeah. This is just me plugging in the LED things. It's not too big of a deal, just to make sure that works right. And yeah, this is the end. This is where I'm throwing in the GPU and I'm ready to test this puppy. So thankfully, when I plugged that shit in, got everything in working correctly, I was able to just immediately get a display. I know that might not be the case for most people, but like I was able to nail this thing first try. Like it was not hard at all for me to get this thing working right. And yeah, it was a very, very smooth process. Updating the BIOS was incredibly easy. I just got the USB, went online, downloaded the latest version for my motherboard, went in, plugged it in, and the PC was able to read the drive very, very effectively. It took like 5 minutes to update the BIOS. Super easy process. And then I went through and I downloaded Windows 11 on the same USB, make sure it's FAT32. And then I turned the PC off. I plugged in the USB while it was turned off. And then when I turned it on, it just immediately booted right into the Windows thing. It was super simple and easy process. Went through. I didn't have Wi-Fi at the time, so I had to like use the little override command. But as soon as I downloaded the that's the other thing. I had to download the Wi-Fi driver on the USB off of my main rig and then plug it into the PC to extract the file and then run the operation and everything. So I was able to get Wi-Fi like that. I had to use the USB to get the Wi-Fi driver. As soon as that was in place, though, everything was so easy. Driver after driver after driver, boom, 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 boom. Got everything in. Pretty simple process. The Bluetooth on this device is insane. The Bluetooth on the motherboard is literally way better than it is on my Z790 expensive ass like $290 motherboard that I have on my main rig. It's like AirPods are unusable on many Windows devices, but this B550 Bluetooth is amazing. Works on AirPods, works on my Studio Beats, works on, I don't know. I think I would imagine it works on about everything. So yeah, very, very clear connection. The audio is great. I had to extract the little file, and then you have to run the ASUS setup program, where basically just quickly just, you know, takes you through the steps, downloads all the drivers. Yeah, this is me back in the BIOS. Oh yeah, that's right. I had to configure the RAM to make sure that it was working correctly. This might have taken me a little while. I'm not great at navigating the BIOS, but yeah, I went over to the RAM sticks, made sure they were running it at a 3200 megahertz because before it was only 2400 megahertz. And that's really all I did for the BIOS. I know there's a few other things that people like to tweak, but obviously I'm going to leave that to the person that's going to own the case. But this is what it ended up looking like in the end. Looking pretty solid, and doing some benchmarks here. Yeah. So I went ahead and benchmarked a couple of games. Cyberpunk is a really demanding title, and this PC was able to perform in it as well as it would with a 4060, like the RTX 4060, the NVIDIA equivalent of this graphics card. And yeah, you can see here that the 4060 averages about 50 to 60 FPS, which is exactly what we got using the 6650 XT. This was done on default settings for both the 4060 and the 6650 XT. But take into account that I'm also using the graphics card for this PC to record this gameplay. And I'm also playing on a 1440p monitor. So the resolution is actually a little bit more than 1080p. I call it 1080p plus. And yeah, I'm just going to like fast forward through this little like benchmarking section. Nice. So this is the first benchmark that I did with completely default settings. You know, everything was on high, ray tracing was enabled. The resolution was at 1080p, or what I would call 1080p plus, since this is a 1440p monitor, like I said. But the temps are super stable. They're going to be at like around 70 degrees Celsius. Not like very, 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 very stable graphics card. This is me disabling ray tracing. Let's see where this goes. Holy shit, it's taking forever. Okay, yeah. And obviously you can see before we were getting like 53 FPS. Now we're getting 65 FPS. Well above the default graphics simply by disabling ray tracing. And it didn't really affect the quality of the game that much, but it improved the FPS considerably. Yeah, as you can see, before it was 59.71. Now it's 69.86. So we got a little over 10 FPS. And so in the next game that I tested is Dead by Daylight. And I know this game isn't that graphically demanding at all. It's just a game that I really like. It's a game that I play a lot and have a really good feel for as far as performance is concerned. And I'm going to tell you right now that I was blown away by this graphics card. Ultra settings, the max settings you can get. And yeah, you can't really tell from this video because of the compression. YouTube's compression is pretty extreme. But yeah, I'm averaging about 100, anywhere from like 110 to 120 FPS on ultra settings. Kind of looks like shit because of YouTube's compression, but when I was playing this game, it looked absolutely wonderful. Yeah, most people that play this game play it on low settings, which would bring the utilization of this graphics card down to about, I would say maybe about 45 to 50%. And you would have much better, you'd easily be able to get well above 120 FPS constantly at 100% resolution. Yeah, you can see with every single bump, there wasn't any frame losses, there wasn't any lag. And you have to remember that I'm using this on 1080p plus, and I'm also using the graphics card as the video encoder. So if you were to use this on a native 1080p resolution and you were to use and you weren't making recordings with the graphics card, the FPS would be much more stable. You get more frames, it perform a lot better. But from this video, you can't really tell what the actual gameplay looks like because of YouTube's compression as well as the recording being in 60 FPS. But I can definitely guarantee that, based on the numbers you see on MSI Afterburner, that the PC is performing extremely well for 1080p Ultra. Yeah, I also used a 3D Mark to, get a few benchmarks in. The graphics card was doing really, really well. Total score of 1869, which is pretty average for what is inside this build. And yeah, you can see you get really, really good FPS on Fortnite. You can get a lot of good FPS on GTA 5. Apex Legends 140, Battlefield 5, you get 155 FPS. So this PC holds up really, really well for the parts that it has. And yeah, it definitely, you know, it's definitely a great PC for the 1080p resolution.